Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty significant and recent, actually, from the Trump administration.
That's right, the Department of Government Efficiency,
Yeah.
or DOGE, as it's known, led by Elon Musk.
Exactly. And we've got quite a mix of sources to dig into this. AP reports, transcripts from Amanpour and Company, New York Times podcasts.
Featuring different conservative perspectives, a fiscal conservative and economist.
Right. Plus a Reddit thread with conservative viewpoints on Musk, and a briefing doc summarizing news coverage.
So quite a lot to unpack there.
Definitely. Our mission today is really to get under the hood of DOGE. What's the goal? What's actually happening? And what are people saying about it?
And trying to understand the implications for the government without getting sort of bogged down in the usual political back and forth.
Precisely. Okay, so where do we start? The ambition seems like the obvious place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's fascinating right off the bat is the sheer scale they were talking about initially. Elon Musk mentioned aiming for, $2 trillion in cuts?
$2 trillion? That's, put that in context for us.
Well, the entire federal budget is around $6 trillion annually. So $2 trillion,
yeah,
that's a massive, massive reduction target.
Huge. Now, that number seems to have softened a bit more recently, maybe $1 trillion.
That's what's been mentioned more recently, yeah. A $1 trillion target. Still enormous, but, not two.
And what are they actually claiming in terms of savings so far? Because the numbers seem a bit variable.
They do. The White House initially claimed at least $2.2 billion in savings.
Okay.
But then the DOGE website itself puts the figure higher, at least $5.6 billion saved.
So a few billion either way, but then we have this other perspective, right, from the fiscal conservative.
Exactly. This is where it gets really interesting. The source from the New York Times podcasts estimates maybe only $2 billion in actual savings.
Only $2 billion compared to the trillions aimed for.
Right. And this person actually called that amount budget dust.
Budget dust. Wow.
Yeah. Describing it as like 1/35 of 1% of the whole federal budget. Tiny.
So it really throws the scale into perspective, doesn't it? You have these big claims, but compared to the overall budget.
It highlights the challenge.
Yeah.
And it immediately brings up that major hurdle. How do you get anywhere near even $1 trillion, let alone $2 trillion, without touching the really big spending areas?
Like Medicare, Social Security.
Exactly. Veterans benefits, defense spending. And President Trump has pretty much signaled those are, unlikely targets for DOGE.
So you're left wondering where those kind of transformative savings could possibly come from.
Precisely. Which kind of leads us naturally into how different groups are reacting, especially conservatives, right? You'd think they'd be all for this.
You would assume so. Generally, Republicans favor smaller government spending cuts, and we do see some of that enthusiasm.
Yeah, the AP reports mentioned some conservatives felt that Musk's involvement, his profile, his access, might actually make this effort more effective than things tried in the past.
Like he could shake things up, break through the usual inertia.
That seems to be the hope for some. Someone from outside the system with that kind of influence. Maybe he can actually do it.
But it's not universal praise, is it? Even among conservatives.
Not at all. The AP also highlights concerns from budget hawks. These are the folks really focused on deficit reduction.
Okay, the serious fiscal conservative.
Right. And some of them worry that DOGE isn't actually going after the big drivers of spending. Instead, maybe targeting smaller things that are maybe more politically charged.
Politically charged, like?
Well, the expert from the Cato Institute, on Amanpour, suggested some recommendations felt almost like a PR campaign, targeting things perceived as, liberal or left-leaning parts of government.
Okay, so less about the bottom line, more about scoring points or changing the narrative.
That's certainly a perception mentioned, that maybe the strategy was to, rally the conservative base first by hitting these culturally resonant targets, even if the financial impact is small.
Interesting. And this criticism isn't just from commentators, is it? We're hearing concerns from Republican lawmakers themselves.
Yes, and that's quite striking. The AP laid out several examples. You have Senator Katie Britt from Alabama. She's worried about NIH grants, research funding.
Okay, impacting science.
Then Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas, really concerned about U.S. cell disruptions, specifically American food aid potentially spoiling.
That sounds serious. Actual food aid.
Yeah. He did mention some good news later. The State Department apparently approved resuming shipment of about $560 million worth of that aid.
Oh, okay. So that specific issue was resolved.
Well, the immediate shipment, yes.
Yeah.
But the piece notes uncertainty remains about the long-term funding and just the ability to deliver aid if U.S. aid itself is being, dismantled or heavily cut back.
Right. The underlying capability. Who else?
Representative Mike Simpson from Idaho warned about national parks being impaired because of hiring cuts.
Parks.
Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina was reportedly not happy about a lack of consultation on potential VA cuts.
Cuts affecting veterans.
Yes. And Representative Jen Kiggins from Virginia actually asked the defense secretary to try and limit layoffs that would hit veterans.
So a real pattern there. Even Representative Don Bacon.
From Nebraska, yeah. He stressed needing a careful approach, basically saying you can't just cut blindly, you need to preserve critical missions. He even cited having to rehire some USDA workers who were let go because they were needed for the bird flu response.
Wow. So they cut people and then had to immediately rehire them.
Apparently so, in that specific case. It really highlights the complexity. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet.
No, clearly not. And it's fascinating that these concerns are coming from within the president's own party. It's not just the usual opposition.
It really underscores the tension, doesn't it? It's not necessarily opposing the idea of efficiency, but raising alarms about the way it's being done and the potential fallout for things they and their constituents care about.
Real-world impacts versus abstract goals. Now, shifting slightly, what about the legal side of things? There have been challenges, right?
Oh, yes. The briefing document we looked at mentioned dozens of lawsuits, people claiming illegal actions by the administration and DOGE.
Dozens. And what's been the result?
Well, according to the summary, judges have been pretty quick to step in, slapping on limits and halting many of the White House actions.
So the courts are actively pushing back.
It certainly seems so, which raises significant legal questions about, the authority being used and the methods.
And how has the administration or Musk reacted to that judicial oversight?
That's also quite telling. Both Musk and Vice President Vance were reported questioning the legitimacy of the courts stepping in like this.
Questioning the court's role.
Yeah, which the AP notes raises those fundamental concerns about the balance of powers, between the executive and judicial branches.
Right, but not everyone shares that concern. What about Congress?
Well, House Speaker Mike Johnson was quoted expressing quite a bit of enthusiasm for DOGE and even suggesting the courts should maybe take a step back.
So a real split in perspective there on the role of the courts in overseeing this.
Definitely. A tension between wanting DOGE to move fast and concerns about potential executive overreach versus seeing the courts as a necessary check.
Okay, let's pivot back to the fiscal conservatives. We touched on the budget hawks, but what's the broader view from those who, theoretically should be fans of cutting spending?
Well, the New York Times transcript revealed quite a bit of frustration, actually.
Frustration? Why?
The sense was that DOGE's approach felt more like slash and burn, rather than a thoughtful effort to make government genuinely work better, more efficiently.
So cutting for cutting's sake, rather than improving function.
That seems to be the critique. And the economists on Amanpour echoed this, saying, while people dislike ineffective government, data suggests most Americans don't actually want less government in major areas like health or retirement. They want it to work better.
Right. Improve it, don't just axe it.
Exactly. And the fiscal conservative from the NYT also mentioned the lack of clarity around DOGE's operations, the opaqueness.
Like, how are they making decisions? Where are the savings really coming from?
Precisely. And suggesting some of those claimed savings might just be, accounting tricks or errors.
The budget dust idea again.
Yeah, leading to this label of DOGE being essentially government spending cut theater.
Theater, meaning it looks dramatic but isn't achieving much substance.
That's the implication. Focusing on targets that get attention, maybe resonate culturally, but don't really move the needle on the actual federal budget deficit.
And their argument is that real deficit reduction needs what?
It needs tackling the big things, entitlements, mostly, and potentially looking at revenue like taxes, things DOGE explicitly isn't doing.
So there's a concern that DOGE might actually distract from the real issues needed for fiscal health.
That's definitely part of the critique. Plus, the worry that if you have tax cuts happening elsewhere, and DOGE isn't really finding offsetting savings, the deficit could actually increase.
Right. The opposite of the intended effect. It paints a picture of, Well, maybe more symbolism than actual fiscal responsibility.
That's the concern being raised by these particular fiscal conservatives. Yes, it's complex.
Okay, so what about Musk himself in all this? What's his take, and what's his future with DOGE?
Well, AP reported he defended the work, said it has been effective.
But there's always a but.
But he did add, not as effective as I'd like.
An admission of the challenges, maybe?
Perhaps, or managing expectations. And we know he's reportedly getting ready to step back from his direct role, winding down his involvement.
Stepping back, was this always the plan?
It seems like it might have been a fixed-term kind of engagement. There were reports of applause from the cabinet as he began this planned departure.
So his direct leadership phase is ending. Does that mean DOGE itself ends?
Not necessarily. Fox News mentioned a DOGE caucus forming in Congress. Lawmakers plotting a White House meeting, indicating they want to carry the effort forward somehow.
Interesting. So the idea might outlast Musk's direct involvement.
It looks that way. It's just the core ideas have found some traction among certain lawmakers who want to institutionalize this kind of approach.
Okay, one last source perspective, the Reddit discussion. What did we glean from that?
That was quite illuminating, actually. Very candid. A lot of general skepticism about politicians and their honesty.
Okay, standard online cynicism.
But interestingly, they were applying that same skepticism to Musk and his claims about DOGE.
Even towards Musk, despite his outsider status.
Yep, accusations of, lying or backpedaling on that huge initial $2 trillion figure, questions about whether it was ever feasible.
So even among conservatives online, not everyone was buying the initial hype.
Definitely not. Lots of comparisons to past political promises about cutting waste and just general doubt about achieving these massive budget cuts.
Any other themes pop up there?
Yeah, one quite interesting suggestion was that maybe DOGE wasn't really about efficiency at all.
Oh. What was it about then, according to this view?
More about influencing government policy in ways that might, benefit certain business interests.
Oh. Using the efficiency drive as a cover for shaping regulations or policies favorably.
That was a viewpoint expressed in the discussion. Adds another layer of potential motivation to consider.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together. It feels like DOGE is this, significant push for rapid cuts driven by this idea of efficiency.
Definitely significant, yeah. And Musk's involvement gave it a very high profile. But, as we've seen, the approach, the claimed results, the actual impact, it's generated wildly different reactions.
Right. You've got the enthusiasm for the goal.
But then serious concerns about the methods, the potential damage to programs, to research.
And real questions from fiscal experts about whether it's actually effective at tackling the debt in a meaningful way.
Exactly. Even people who generally want smaller government are raising specific objections about how this is being done. Those huge initial targets seem to be crashing into the wall of, reality and government complicity.
It really does. So as Musk steps back and this DOGE caucus potentially carries it forward, it leaves us with some big questions, doesn't it?
It really does. Like, what are the real metrics for success here? How do you actually measure genuine government efficiency?
Yeah, and how do you balance that drive for, fiscal responsibility, which is a valid goal, with the need to keep essential services running, fund research, address complex problems?
It's the perennial challenge. And maybe the biggest takeaway is what the reaction itself tells us. This mixed, often critical response, even from conservatives.
What does it tell us?
Well, perhaps it reveals what policymakers, the public, really prioritize when push comes to shove regarding government size and role. It seems the devil isn't just in the details of how you cut, but in deciding what society is actually willing to sacrifice in the name of efficiency.
A very thought-provoking place to end. Definitely gives you something to chew on regarding the true trade-offs involved.